If you like this video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe, it really helps us out. Hit the bell icon to be notified of new videos. Our channel is running a contest. When we hit 250 subscribers, one lucky person will get $100. All you need to do is subscribe and comment, it's that easy. YouTube HAVs nothing to do with this contest, it is run by this channel only. I went to the Pentagon the subsequent morning. I did not assume to study much, but I desired to make certain we weren't tangling with security. I'd labored with Al Skolin and Orville Split in the journal area of public relations, and I think they'd inform me as a whole lot as anyone. When I walked in, I sprang it on the cold. What's the threat of seeing your project, Saucer, files? Al Skolin took it greater or much less deadpan. Split appeared at me a second and then grinned. Don't inform me you consider the matters are real. Maybe, I said. How about clearing me with Project Saucer? Al shook his head. It's nevertheless labeled secret. Look, Don, stated Split, why do you choose to idiot with that saucer business? There's nothing to it. That's a massive alternate from what the Air Force used to be saying. In 1947, I advised him. He shrugged that off. The Air Force has spent 2 years checking into it. Everybody from Symington down will inform you the sources are bunk. That's no longer what Project Saucer says in that April report. That document used to be made up a long time ago, stated Split. They simply received around to releasing it. Then they've acquired all the solutions now. They understand there may be nothing to it, Split repeated. In that case, I said, Project Saucer should not object to my seeing their files and pictures. What pictures? 28. That one was taken at Harmon Field, Newfoundland, for a starter. Oh, that thing, stated Split. It wasn't anything, just a shadow on a cloud. Somebody's been kidding you. If it is simply a cloud shadow, why cannot I see it? Split was once getting a little nettled. Look, you recognize how long it takes to declassify stuff. They simply have not got round to it. Take my phrase for it, the flying saucers are bunk. I went around with Sid Shallett on some of his interviews. What he has acquired in the Post is the absolute gospel. It's humorous about that April 27th report, I said, the way it contradicts the Post. I inform you that used to be a historical report. I would not say that, Al Skolin put in. The Air Force does not declare it has all the answers. But they've proved a lot of the reviews have been hoaxes or mistakes. Just the same, I said, the Air Force is on record, as of April 27th, that it is serious ample for anybody to be vigilant. And they admit most of the things, in the necessary cases, are nonetheless unidentified. Including the saucer Mantle was once chasing. That commercial enterprise at Godman Field was once some variety of hallucination, insisted Split. I think all these pilots and Godman Field officers had been hypnotized. Not to point out several thousand humans at Madisonville and Fort Knox. Take it easy, you guys, stated Al Skolin. You've each obtained a proper to your opinions. Oh, sure, stated Split. He appeared at me, with his grin back. I do not care if you suppose they're men from Mars. Let's now not go off the deep end, I said. Tell me this. Did Shallett get to see any secret documents at Wright Field? Absolutely not. 29. Then he had to take the Air Force phrase for everything. Not entirely. We set up some interviews for him. One greater thing, and do not get mad. If it is all bunk, why have not they closed Project Saucer? How do I know? Probably no one needs to take the responsibility. Then any person excessive up have to now not assume it is bunk, I said. Split laughed. Have it your very own way. Before I left, I instructed them I used to be working with True. I favor to be on the record, I said, as having advised you this. If there is any security involved, if you inform me it is something you are working on naturally, I'll lay off. Al Skolin stated emphatically, "It's no longer an Air Force device if it truly is what you mean. Some humans assume it is Russian. If it is, I do not be aware of it," stated Al, "and neither does the Air Force." After I left the journal section, I tried quite a few offices I knew. 2 of them agreed with split. The 0.33 didn't. "I've been advised it is all bunk," he said, "but you get the feeling they've trying to persuade themselves. They act like humans close to a haunted house. They'll swear it isn't always haunted, but they may not go close to it." Later, I requested a safety most important for a replica of the Project Saucer report. "We're out of copies proper now," he said. "I'll ship you one subsequent week." I requested him bluntly what he idea the sources were. "I doubt if All and Sundry has the full answer," he stated seriously. "There's been some hysteria, also a few mistakes. But many reviews have been made by using reliable pilots, which includes our own. You cannot chuckle these off." As I drove home, I idea over what I'd heard. All I had discovered used to be that the Air Force regarded divided. But that ought to be a smokescreen. In less than 24 hours, I acquired my first suspicious tip. It used to be about 10 a.m. when my smartphone rang. "Mr. Kehoe. This is John Steele," stated the voice at the different end. Because of the bizarre position he played, then and later, I have now not used his actual name. "I'm a former Air Force intelligence officer. I was once in the European theater for the duration of the war." I waited. He hesitated a moment. "I heard you were working on the flying saucer problem," he stated quickly. "I may have some records that would pastime you. Mind telling me who informed you I used to be on it?" I asked. "No one, directly. I simply came about to hear it stated at the press club. Frankly, I've been curious about the flying saucers ever considering 45. That startled me, but I did not inform him so." "Do you have any notion what they are?" Mr. Steele said. "No. I've simply begun checking. But I'd be satisfied to hear what you've got." "I can also be way off," stated Steele. "But I've usually puzzled about the Foo Fighters our pilots noticed over Europe close to the cease of the war. I notion for a second. Wasn't that some sort of anti-aircraft missile fired from the ground?" "No. Intelligence in no way did get any actual answer, so away as I know. They were some type of round gadgets, and they honestly chased our planes several times. We thought they had been something the Nazis had invented, and I nonetheless assume so." "Then who's launching him now?" "Well, it is for sure both Russia or us. If it is the Soviet, well, it truly is what's involved me. I do not suppose it ought to be dealt with like a joke, the way some humans in the Pentagon take it." I stared at the phone, attempting to determine him out. "I'd like to discuss it over with you," I said. "Maybe you've got bought something." 31, "I've given you about all I know," Steele answered. "There used to be an intelligence file you would possibly attempt to see. The 8th Air Force documents must have it." "Wait a minute," I said. "Give me your number, in case I discover anything." He gave it to me except obvious hesitation. I thanked him and hung up, nevertheless wondering. If it used to be a Triata plant, it was once without a doubt crude. The point out of his former Air Force connection would be sufficient to arouse suspicion, unless he counted on his obvious frankness to offset it. And what about the press club angle? That would point out Steele used to be a newspaperman. Could this be in simple terms and try to pump me and get a lead on True's investigation? But that would be simply as crude as the different idea. Of course, he would possibly be sincere. But regardless of his motives, it looked bad. Arad, who had instructed him about me. I notion about that for a minute. Then I picked up the telephone and dialed Jack Daly's number. "Jack, do you understand everyone named John Steele?" I requested him. "I assume he's a newspaperman." Nobody I know, stated Jack. Why, what's up? I explained, and added, I notion perhaps you knew him, and he'd heard about it from you. Hell, no, stated Jack. You ought to be aware of I would not leak any tip like that. It would not be a tip. I do not be aware of whatever about this deal yet. By the way, when you have been on the Star, did you take care of whatever on Foo Fighters? No, that used to be after I left there. Bill Shippen would have included that, anyway. I advised him I would seam it up in the Star's morgue. Jack stated he would meet me there at 3 o'clock. In the intervening time he would see what he could locate out about Steele. 32 Jack was once a little late, and I went over the Star's file on the Foo Fighters. Most of the records have been protected in a story dated July 6, 1947, which had been stimulated by way of the outbreak of the saucer scare. I copied it for later use. During the latter phase of World War II, fighter pilots in England have been convinced that Hitler had a new secret weapon. Yanks dubbed these devices Foo Fighters, or Kraut fireballs. One of the Air Force intelligence guys now assigned to take a look at on the saucer scare was once an officer who investigated statements of the Army airmen that round Foo warring parties had been considered over Europe and additionally on the bombing route to Japan. It was once stated that intelligence officers have by no means acquired fantastic explanation of reviews of flying silver balls and discs over Nazi-occupied Europe in the iciness of 1944–45. Later, crews of B-29s on bombing runs to Japan pronounced seeing incredibly comparable objects. In Europe, some Foo opponents danced simply off the Allied fighters' wingtips and performed tag with them in energy dives. Others regarded in specific formations, and one event the entire bomber crew noticed about 15 following at a distance, their extraordinary glow flashing on and off. One Foo fighter chased Lieutenant Myers of Chicago some 20 miles down the Rhine Valley, at 300 meters. P.H. an AP hostilities correspondent reported. Intelligence officers believed at that time that the balls would possibly be radar-controlled objects dispatched up to foul ignition structures or baffle Allied radar networks. There is no rationalization of their look here, except the objects could have been imported for secret assessments in this country. I examined the ultimate paragraph twice. This appeared like a sturdy lead to the answer, despite the Air Force denials. There used to be another, much less nice possibility. The Russians ought to have seized the gadget and developed it secretly, the usage of Nazi scientists to assist them. Perhaps the Nazis had been close to an atomic engine, even if they did fail to produce the bomb. Jack Daly got here in whilst I was once analyzing the story again. 33, I obtained the dope on Steele, he said. He does portions for a small syndicate, and I determined out he was once in the Air Force. I suppose he used to be a captain. People who recognize him say he is okay, a straight shooter. That nevertheless would not hold him from giving me a faux tip. If any individual advised him it was once the proper aspect to do. Maybe not, stated Jack, but why would they choose to plant this Foo fighter idea? I confirmed the clipping. He examines it over and shook his head. That's a lot distinctive from discs 300 ft in diameter. If we bought the principle or Russia did, building large ones may no longer be too hard. I nevertheless cannot swallow it, stated Jack. These matters have been considered all over the world. How should they manipulate them that a ways away and be positive they wouldn't crash? The place any individual may want to get a seam and dope out the secret. We argued it lower back and forth besides getting anywhere. I'd supply a lot to be aware of Steele's angle, I said. If you hear whatever extra on him, supply me a buzz. Jack nodded. I'll see what I can do. But I cannot dig too hard, or he'll hear about it. On the way out, I determined a smartphone sales space and known as Split. Foo fighters, he said. Sure. I will be aware of these stories. You assume these are your flying sources? I may want to hear him snicker. Just checking angles, I said. Didn't the 8th Air Force look at the Foo Fighters? Yes, and they observed nothing to lower back up the pilot's yarns. Simply combat nerves, apparently. How about a seam at the intelligence report? I asked. 34, wait a minute. Split used to be long gone for twice that time. Then he came back. Sorry, it is classified. If all this stuff is bunk, why maintain the lid on it? I demanded. I was once getting sore again. Look, Don, stated Split, I do not make the rules. Sure. I know, sorry, I said. I had a thought to ask him if he knew John Steele, however, hung up instead. There was once no use in banging my head against the Air Force wall. The subsequent day I determined to analyze the Mantle case from commencing to end. It is regarded as the key to one angle. The query of an Air Force secret missile. Unless there was once some slip-up, so that Mantle and his pilots had been ordered to chase the disk with the aid of mistake, then it would be cold murder. I could not trust any Air Force officer would provide such an order, no matter how super the secret to being hidden. But I used to be going to locate out, if possible. 35 CHAPTER5 for more than 2 weeks, I checked on the Godman Field tragedy. One truth stood out at the start. The demise of Mantle had had a profound effect on many in the Air Force. A dozen instances I used to be told. I thinking the sources had been a joke until Mantle was once killed chasing that thing at Fort Knox. Many ranking officers who had laughed at the saucer scare stopped scoffing. One of these was once General Saury Smith, now Deputy Director of Air Force Public Relations. Later in my investigation, General Smith instructed me, it used to be the Mantle case that obtained me. I knew Tommy Mantle very well, also Colonel Hicks, the CO at Godman. I knew they had been each clever men, not the type to be imagining things. For 15 months, the Air Force saved a tight-lipped silence. Meantime, rumors commenced spreading. One document said that Mantle had been shot, his body riddled with bullets. His P-51, additionally riddled, had actually disintegrated. Another rumor pronounced Mantle as having been killed by way of some mysterious force. This identical pressure had additionally destroyed his fighter. The Air Force, the rumors said, had blanketed up the reality by way of telling Mantle's household he had blacked out from lack of oxygen. Checking the ultimate angle, I determined that this used to be the rationalization given to Mantle's mother, simply after his death, was once informed by using Standiford field officers that he had flown too excessive in chasing the atypical object. Charlotte, in the Saturday Evening Post articles, described project, sources, reconstruction of the case. Mantle used to be stated to have climbed up to 25,000 feet, notwithstanding his company selection to stop the chase at 20,000, since he carried no oxygen. Around 25,000 feet, Shalit quoted the Air Force investigators, Mantle needs to have misplaced consciousness. After this, his pilotless airplane climbed on up to some 30,000 feet, then dived. Between 20,000 and 10,000 feet, Shalit suggested, the P-51 started to disintegrate, for sure from a moderate speed. The sparkling object that 36 hypnotized Mantle into this deadly climb was, Shalit said, both the planet Venus or a Navy cosmic ray lookup balloon. The Air Force Project Saucer document of April 27, 1949, launched simply after the first Post article, makes these statements. 5 minutes after Mantle disappeared from his formation, the 2 remaining planes lower back to Godman. A few minutes later, one resumed the search, protecting territory 100 miles to the south as excessive as 33,000 feet, however, located nothing. Subsequent investigation printed that Mantle had likely blacked out at 20,000 feet from lack of oxygen and had died of suffocation earlier than the crash. The mysterious object which the flyer chased to his demise was once first identified as the planet Venus. However, Similarly, probing confirmed the elevation and azimuth readings of Venus and the object at targeted time intervals did no longer coincide. It is nonetheless regarded unidentified. The Venus explanation, even although now denied, puzzled me. It used to be plain that the Air Force had severely regarded presenting it as the answer, then deserted it. Apparently, anybody had acquired his indicators mixed and let Shalit use the discarded answer. And for some unknown reason, the Air Force had discovered it vital to deny the Venus story at once. In these first weeks of checking, I had run onto the Venus rationalization in other cases. Several Air Force officers repeated it so rapidly that it had the sound of an inventory alibi. But in the sunlight hours instances, this was once nearly ridiculous. I knew of a few cases in World War II when bomber crews and anti-aircraft gunners had loosed a few bursts at Venus. But this used to be mostly at night when the planet was once at its height of brilliance. And extra than one gunner later admitted firing to relieve lengthy hours of boredom. Since enemy planes did no longer raise lights, there was once no actual case, to my knowledge, the place airplane or floor gunners, in reality, believed Venus used to be an enemy aircraft. 37 Checking the astronomer's report, I study over the concluding statement. It clearly ought to now not have been Venus. They have to have been determined even to advise it in the first place. Months later, in the secret project, Saucer, record launched December 30, 1949, I located professional confirmation of this astronomer's opinions. Since it has an atypical bearing on the mantle case, I am quoting it now. When Venus is at its biggest brilliance, it is viable to see it all through daytime when one is aware of precisely the place to look. But on January 7, 1948, Venus was once much less than one-half as brilliant as its height brilliance. However, underneath exceptionally exact atmospheric conditions, and with the eye shielded from direct rays of the sun, Venus would possibly be viewed as a noticeably tiny bright factor of light. However, the probabilities of searching at simply the proper spot are very few. It has been unofficially said that the object used to be a Navy cosmic ray research balloon. If this can be established, it is to be favored as an explanation. However, if one accepts the assumption that reviews from various localities refer to the identical object, any such machine needs to have been desirable many miles high -25 to 50, to have been viewed clearly, nearly simultaneously, from locations 175 miles apart. If all reviews had been of a single object, in the know-how of this investigator no man-made object ought to have been massive ample and some distance ample away for the approximate simultaneous sightings. It is most unlikely, however, that so many separated people ought to at that time have chanced on Venus in the daylight hours sky. It looks consequently a good deal extra likely that more than one object was once involved. The sighting may have covered 2 or greater balloons, or aircraft, or they would possibly have protected Venus and balloons. For motives given above, the latter clarification looks extra likely. 2 matters stand out in his report. 1. The apparent dedication to in shape some explanation, no count number how far-fetched, to the mantle sighting. 382. The impossibility that Venus, a tiny factor of light, viewed solely with difficulty, was the excellent steel object described by way of mantle and seen by using Godman field offices. With Venus eliminated, I went to work on the balloon theory. Since I had been a balloon pilot earlier than mastering to fly planes, this used to be pretty acquainted ground. Shalit's alternate idea that Mantle had chased a Navy research balloon was once broadly repeated by using readers unfamiliar with balloon operation. Few notions to test the speeds, heights, and distances involved. Cosmic ray lookup balloons are no longer powered. They are set free to waft with the wind. This specific Navy kind is launched at a base close to Minneapolis. The gasoline bag is crammed with solely a small percent of its helium capacity earlier than the takeoff. In a pursuits flight, The balloon ascends swiftly to a very excessive altitude as high as 100,000 feet. By this time the fuel bag has swelled to full size, about 100 ft excessive and 70 feet in diameter. At a set time, a gadget releases the case of gadgets underneath the balloon. The devices descend through the parachute, and the balloon, rising quickly, explodes from the sudden expansion. Occasionally a balloon starts off-valve leaking, and it then stays fantastically low. At first glance, this would possibly appear the reply to the Kentucky sightings. If the balloon had been low enough, it would loom up as a giant round object, as viewed from immediately below. Some witnesses may estimate its diameter as 250 toes or more, as an alternative to its authentic 70 feet. But this failure to recognize a balloon would require extraordinarily terrible imagination and prescience on the phase of trained observers, state police, Army MPs, the Godman field officers, Mantle and his pilots. Captain Mantle used to be a wartime pilot, with over 3,000 hours in the air. He used to be skilled to become aware of a far-off enemy airplane in a break-up second. His imaginative and prescient was once perfect, and so used to be that of his pilots. In extensive daylight, they may want to now not fail to apprehend a balloon at some stage in their 30-minute chase. 39 Colonel Hicks and the different Godman officers watched the object with high-powered glasses for lengthy periods. It is wonderful that they would no longer identify it as a balloon. Before its look over Godman Field, the leaking balloon would have drifted, at a low altitude, over quite a few hundred miles. A leak giant enough to convey it down from excessive altitude would have precipitated it to land and be found. Drifting at a low altitude, it would have been viewed through several 100,000 people, at the very least. Many would have reported it as a balloon. But even if this attitude is unnoticed, it nonetheless should no longer possibly have been a balloon at low altitude. The speedy flight from Madisonville, the abrupt cease and hour-long hovering at Godman Field, the rapid bursts of velocity Mantle said make it impossible. To fly the go miles from Madisonville to Fort Knox in 30 minutes, a balloon would require a wind of 180 mph. After journeying at this storm speed, it would then have had to come to a useless give-up above Godman Field. As the P-51s approached, it would have had to velocity tip again to 180, then to more than 360 to preserve beforehand of Mantle. The three fighter pilots chased the mysterious object for 1/2 an hour. I have various instances chased balloons with a plane, overtaking them in seconds. In a straight chase, Mantle would have been closing in at 360. The tailwind appearing on his fighter would nullify the balloon's ahead drift. But even if you receive these inconceivable factors, there is one closing reality that nullifies the balloon explanation. The ordinary object had disappeared when Mantle's wingman searched the sky, simply after the leader's death. If it had been a balloon held stationary for an hour at a high altitude, and glowing brightly adequate to be viewed through clouds, it would have remained seen in the equal widely widespread position. Seen from 33,000 feet, it would have been even brighter, due to the fact of the clearer air. But the mysterious object had absolutely vanished in these few minutes. A search protecting 100 miles failed to expose a trace. Whether at an excessive or low altitude, a balloon ought to now not have escaped the pilot's eyes. It would additionally have persevered to be considered at Godman Field and other points, via occasional breaks in the clouds. 40I pointed out this information to one Air Force officer at the Pentagon. Next the day he phoned me, I figured it out. The timing gadget went off and the balloon exploded. That's why the pilot did not see it. It's an ordinary coincidence, I said, that it exploded in these 5 minutes after Mantle's ultimate report. Even so, it is needless to say the answer, he said. Checking on this angle, I found 1. No one in the Kentucky location had said a descending parachute. 2. No cosmic ray lookup instrument case or parachute was once determined in the area. 3. No contraptions have been lower back to the Navy from this region. And all balloons and gadgets launched at that time have been totally accounted for. Even if it had been a balloon, it would no longer explain the later January 7 reports, the simultaneous sightings referred to with the aid of Professor Hynek in the Project Saucer report. This consists of the factor considered at Lockbourne Air Force Base 2 hours after Mantle's death. Obviously, the saucer considered flying at 500 mph over Lockbourne Field could no longer have been a balloon. Even if there had been several balloons in this region, and there have been not, through reputable record, they may want to now not have covered the publications reported. In some cases, they would have been flying against the wind, at splendid speed. Then what was once the mysterious object? And what killed Mantle? Both the Air Force and the Post articles speculate that Mantle carelessly let himself black out. Since some clarification had to be given, this would possibly appear a proper answer. But Mantle was once acknowledged for cool-headed judgment. As a wartime pilot, he was acquainted with signs and symptoms of anoxia, oxygen starvation. That he knew his tolerance for altitude is proved through his firmly declared intention to abandon the chase at 20,000 feet, seeing that he had no oxygen equipment. 41 Mantle had his altimeter to warn him. From experience, he would recognize the first indistinct blurring, narrowing of vision, and other signs and symptoms of anoxia. Despite this, the blackout rationalization used to be widespread as plausible with the aid of many Americans. While investigating the Mantle case, I talked with quite a few pilots and aeronautical engineers. Several wondered that a P-51 beginning a dive from 20,000 toes would have disintegrated so thoroughly. From 30,000 feet, yes, stated one engineer. If the notion used to be to explain it away, I choose an excessive altitude to begin from. But a pilotless airplane doesn't always dive, as you know. It may slip off and spin, or spiral down, and a few have even landed themselves. Also, if the aircraft started down from 20,000, the pilot would not be to distance blacked out. The odds are he'd come to when he got into thicker air admitting he did blur out, which is solely an Air Force guess. I do not see why they're so fantastic Mantle died earlier than he hit the ground unless they recognize something we don't. One of the pilot team put it extra bluntly. It appears like a cover-up to me. I assume Mantle did simply what he stated he would, close in on the thing. I suppose he both collided with it, or extra likely they knocked him out of the air. They'd suppose he used to be attempting to bring him down, barging in like that. Even if you be given the blackout answer, it nevertheless does no longer explain what Mantle used to be chasing. It is feasible that, excited by way of the huge, mysterious object, he recklessly climbed past the threat level, even though such an act was definitely at odds with his character. But the identification of the aspect remains officially a mystery. If it used to be some bizarre experimental craft or a guided missile, then whose was once it? Air Force officers had many times advised me they had no such device. General Carl Towhee Sparks, former Air Force chief, had publicly insisted that no such weapon had been developed in his regime. Secretary Symington and General Hoyt Vandenberg, existing Air Force chief, had been equally emphatic. Of course, legitimate denials should be anticipated if it were a top-level secret. But if it had been a secret device, would it be examined so publicly that hundreds would see it? 42 If it had been an Air Force device, then I should see solely one reply for the Godman Field incident. The component was once such an intently guarded secret that even Colonel Hicks hadn't known. That would imply that most or all Air Force Base COs had been additionally in lack of awareness of the secret device. Could it be a Navy experiment, saved secret from the Air Force? I did a little checking. Admiral Calvin Bolster, Chief of Aeronautics Lookup Experimental Craft, was an Annapolis classmate of mine. So used to be Captain Delmer S. Farney, head of the Navy Guided Missile Program. Fani used to be at Point Mugu, a missile testing base in California, and I wasn't capable to see him. But I knew him as a careful, conscientious officer. I cannot trust he would let such a device, piloted or not, hover over an Air Force base with no warning to its COI, noticed Admiral Bolster. His denial appeared genuine. Until he'd received to be a deadpan poker participant, given that our beforehand days, I was once certain he used to be telling the truth. The solely different alternate was once Russia. It was once splendid that they would develop such a gadget and then expose it to the gaze of the US Air Force officers. It should be photographed, its velocity and maneuverability checked. It would possibly crash, or anti-aircraft fireplace may convey it down, that the secret may be misplaced in one such. Take a look at flight. There was once one different explanation. The element was once no longer meant to be seen. It had acquired out of control. In this event, the lengthy hovering duration at Godman Field used to be brought on with the aid of the want for repairs internal the flying saucer, or repairs to remote control apparatus. If it has been Air Force or Navy, that would explain legit concern. Even if completely free of negligence, the provider accountable would be blamed for Mantle's death. If it had been Russian, the Air Force would have directed an attempt to conceal the reality for concern of public hysteria. But if the system was once American, it intended that Project Saucer used to be a cover-up unit. While pretending to investigate, it would actually hush up reports, make false explanations, and shield the secret in every feasible way. Also, the suggested order for Air Force Pilots 43 to pursue the discs would have to be a fake. Instead, there would be a secret order telling them to keep away from ordinary objects in the sky. By the time I completed my checkup, I was once positive of one thing: this particular saucer had been real. I was once the nearly high quality of one different point that the element had been over 30 miles excessive at some point of the phase of its flight. I located that after Mantle's loss of life it was said concurrently from Madisonville, Elizabethtown, and Lexington over a distance of 175 miles. Professor Hynek's evaluation later confirmed this. How low it had been whilst hovering over Godman, and for the duration of Mantle's chase, there used to be no way to determine. But all the proof pointed to a swift ascent after Mantle's closing report. Had Mantle instructed Godman Tower greater than the Air Force admitted? I returned to the Pentagon and requested a full transcript of the flight leader's radio messages. I received a speedy turn down. The reports, I used to be told, were nevertheless categorized as secret. Requests for pics of the P-51 wreckage, and a document on the situation of Mantle's body, additionally drew a blank. I had heard that some images had been taken off the Godman Field saucer from the backyard of the tower. But the Air Force denied expertise of any such pictures. Puzzling over the riddle, I remembered John Steele, the former intelligence captain. If by using any risk he used to be a plant, it would be interesting to advocate more than a few solutions and watch his reaction. When I phoned him to recommend luncheon, Steele conventional at once. We met at the Occidental, on Pennsylvania Avenue. Steele was once youthful than I had expected, not over 25. He was once a tall man, with a crew haircut and the construct of a soccer player. Looking at him the first time, I expected a shore breeziness. Instead, he was once nearly solemn. "I owe you an apology," he stated in a cautious voice after we would order. "You likely understand I'm a syndicated writer." I puzzled if he'd discovered out Jack Daly used to be checking on him. "When you cited the press club," I said, "I gathered you had been in the business." 44, I'm afraid you notion I used to be fishing for a lead. Steele appeared at me earnestly. "I'm no longer working on the story, I'm tied up on different stuff." "Forget it," I informed him. He regarded anxious to reassure me. I'd been concerned for some time about the sources. "I knew as you that night time on an impulse." "Glad you did," I said. "I want each tip I can get." "Did it assist you any?" "Yes. although it nonetheless does not suit together. But I can inform you this: the sources are real, or at least one of them. Which one? The issue Captain Mantle used to be chasing close to Fort Knox, earlier than he died. Oh, that one. Steele seemed down at the roll he used to be buttering. I thought that case was once absolutely explained. Wasn't he chasing a balloon? The Air Force says it is nevertheless unidentified. I advised him what I had learned. Apparently you are right, it's both an American or a Soviet missile. After what you have informed me, stated Steele, I cannot trust it is ours. It has to be Russian. They'd be noticeably dull to check it over here. You stated it was once possibly out of control. That precise one, maybe. But there have been various hundred viewed over here. If they observed their controls had been haywire, they would not hold testing the matters till they'd corrected that. The waiter got here with the soup, and Steele was once silent till he left. I nevertheless cannot accept as true with it is our weapon, he stated slowly. They would not have Air Force pilots were alerted to chase the things. And I manifest to how they do. There's something queer about this missile angle, I said. That saucer was considered at the identical time by way of human beings 175 miles 45 apart. To be that excessive in the sky, and nevertheless seem to be greater than 250 ft in diameter, it should have been enormous. Steele did not reply for a moment. Obviously, that used to be an illusion, he subsequently answered. I'd cut price these estimates. Even Mantle's. And the Godman field officers. Not understanding the thing's height, how should they choose accurately? To be considered at factors that some distance apart, it had to be over 30 miles high, I told him. It would have to be massive to exhibit up at all. He shook his head. I cannot agree with those reviews are right. It needs to have been sighted at distinctive times. I let it drop. What are you working on now? Steele asked, after a minute or two. I stated I hadn't decided. Actually, I deliberate an outing to the coast, to interview pilots who had sighted flying discs. What would you do if you observed it wasn't a Soviet missile? Stated Steele. He sounded nearly too casual. If safety was once involved, I'd maintain still. But the Air Force and the Navy swear they have not any such things. Steele seemed at me thoughtfully. You know, True may pressure something into the open that would be better left secret. He smiled ironically. I realize that sounds peculiar since I recommended the Russian angle. But if it is not Russian, though I nevertheless think it is, then we have nothing to worry about. I used to be nearly certain now that he was once a plant. During the relaxation of the luncheon, I tried to draw him out, however, Steele was once via talking. When we parted, he gave me a sober warning. You and True ought to think about your ethical responsibility, no count what you find. Even if it is no longer true security, there can also be motives to keep still. 46 After he left me, I tried to determine it out. If the Air Force used to be again of this, they should no longer assume a whole lot of my intelligence. Or else they had been in such a hurry to get a line on True's investigation that they had no preference but to use Steele. Of course, it used to be nonetheless feasible he used to be doing this on his own. Either way, his motive was once obvious. He hoped to have us swallow the Soviet missile answer. If we did, then we would have to hold still, even though we located absolute proof. Obviously, it would be risky to print that story. Thinking back, I recalled Steele's obvious strive to brush aside the Mantle case. I was once satisfied now. The Godman Field affair should preserve a vital clue that I had overlooked. It would possibly even be the key to the whole flying saucer riddle.